Okay, we'll give everyone just another minute or so, and then we will start the meeting. Mhm. Okay, excuse me. Okay, I guess we can start. Maybe, Will, if you could run through for the new people the usual opening admonitions, then we can get started.
Oh,
Zachary's going to do it,
I
actually.
got it. Yeah.
Oh, okay, Zachary,
Yeah.
sorry.
No, that's okay. Good evening, everybody. Welcome. If this is your first time joining us, everyone will remain muted throughout the meeting except committee co-chairs Anthony Cohen and Elizabeth Ashby and the presenters. Following the presentation, co-chairs will call on members of the public wishing to speak. You can participate by going to the reactions icon, pressing raise hand, not the wave or thumbs up buttons. Only press it once. If you press it a second time, your hand will go back down. If you are on the phone, it is *9 to raise hand and *6 to unmute. Be on the lookout for a prompt asking you to confirm unmuting once the co-chairs call on you. The chat is for technical support only to help with Zoom software problems, not to ask questions of co-chairs. They will not see the chats. If you have an older version of Zoom, you will need to go to the participants section where you will find the raise hand feature there. Please do not raise your actual hand or wave at the screen because we may not be able to see you. Chat me, I'm here for support. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Zachary. Welcome everyone to the November meeting of the Community Board 8 Zoning and Development Committee. And we have a fairly extensive agenda tonight. And so my name is Anthony Cohn. I am one of the co-chairs. Also here is Elizabeth Ashby, who is the other co-chair. And we will, I guess we'll get started. And the first item on the agenda is an update on Community Board 8's special zoning district proposal. And for that, we have, excuse me, our consultant, Tuck Edelstein, who has been working on this with us for quite some time to give us an update. And I think I'm going to just turn it over to him. And you're unmuted.
Super, thank you. Can everybody hear me all right? Sound okay? Yes.
Yes.
Thank you, great. So hi, my name is Tuck Edelstein. My firm is Edelstein Architecture, and we do architecture and planning. And as Anthony said, we've been working with Community Board 8, specifically the Zoning and Development Committee. While as we all know, much of the city faces significant development challenges. The Lenox Hill and Yorkville communities within the Upper East Side face particularly extreme development pressures. So in response to these challenges, we propose to create 2 special districts incorporating Lenox Hill and Yorkville. And within the Upper East Side, Specifically, the avenues, 3rd Avenue, 2nd Avenue, 1st Avenue, and York Avenues. So these initiatives address these avenues only. This is specifically an avenue initiative. So as we presented these initiatives at prior board meetings, I'd like to kind of outline the current conditions that give rise to our proposed actions and briefly discuss the rationale and the specific features, and then summarize our current status before opening things up for any discussion. So the proposal is comprised of 3 components. Establish a height limit of 210 feet consistent with established height limits elsewhere. And this will allow full development of FAR 12 buildings, that is within an envelope, an FAR 10 base building plus 2 FAR affordable housing bonus. The second component is the preservation of existing affordable housing in existing old law and new law tenements. And the third component addresses explicit support provisions for small business through various measures already approved by the City Council in their planning documents. So while these features are readily understandable and in fact enjoy broad support in the community, how to get from proposal stage to actual realization with important agency support is of course a challenge. The core of the situation, the Upper West Side, the West Avenues, that is 5th Avenue, Madison, Park, and Lex, effectively have height limits. Throughout, they're appropriately regulated through a combination of historic districts, limited height districts, and other special purpose districts. And the maximum building heights there are basically defined. This contrasts this with Lenox Hill and Yorkville communities, that is the eastern part of the Upper East Side, in which development along the avenues, 3rd Avenue, 2nd Avenue, 1st and York, in R10 and equivalent districts is really wide open. Building heights are somewhat controlled by bulk and massing requirements, but explicit building heights are unregulated. And as recent experiences have shown, this can and will result in out of control development. The contrast between the western portion of the Upper East Side and the Lenox Hill and Yorkville communities creates a virtual wall of difference in terms of regulation. In the Lenox Hill and Yorkville communities, this is primarily a problem of avenue control. The classic mid-block streets governed by the R8B regulations and the R10A classifications of the arterial cross streets have proven pretty effective. So the overall concern is primarily inappropriate regulation of development along the avenues. And the avenues currently comprise a mix of old law and new law tenements with largely regulated affordable housing, newer post-tenement housing, and larger, sometimes much larger apartment buildings. Also, while small local retail following a traditional model is present, its feasibility is threatened in the face of present-day realities. So our purpose then is to strengthen the character of the community, its scale, its density, and its affordable housing and retail features, while allowing reasonable, predictable growth and enhancing the city's tax base consistent with these values. In response to current realities, we're proposing to create 2 special districts in Lenox Hill and Yorkville. The fundamental concern is to have limits on out-of-control building heights, the loss of affordable housing, and small local retail. In short, to have predictable, appropriate development where it's currently lacking. So just to clarify, these proposed special districts, as I said, comprise the eastern avenues, 3rd, 2nd, 1st, and York. But the Yorkville Special District would run from 59th Street north to 79th Street. And, excuse me, the Lenox Hill District would run from 59th Street to 79th Street. And the Yorkville District would run from 79th
A little bit.
96th. Pardon me? Okay. As I said, these special districts have 3 interrelated components, and they together comprise, in effect, a 3-legged stool. They're intended to achieve 3 very interrelated goals. The first component is, as mentioned, the creation of explicit height limits of 210 feet. Currently, there are no actual building heights. Building heights are controlled only through bulk and massing prescriptives. And these are readily manipulated by zoning lot mergers and other tactics. And current loopholes legislation reflects an attempt to regulate this envelope manipulation, but there are ways to subvert that through manipulation of existing codes, and we've seen that happen. The proposed special districts will limit building heights to 210 feet, period, while importantly, still allowing building developments of FAR 10 and FAR 12, including the affordable housing bonus. So establishment of the absolute building height will be based on a height and setback development model in these proposals, with an overall height limit of 210 feet and a typical contextual base configuration, maintaining a street wall of 60 to 85 feet, and then setbacks of 15 and 20 feet with sky exposure planes for wide and narrow streets respectively, though we're principally addressing wide streets here. And this will preserve the prevailing typical street wall height while limiting out of context buildings, and it's reflective of the Upper East Side. So the second of the three components of the special districts comprises tenement preservation and affordable housing support. This is designed to preserve existing old law and new law tenements and their associated affordable housing. That is to preserve not only the buildings, but specifically the rent-regulated apartments contained therein. Addressing affordable housing specifically, the community is economically diverse, but this will and increasingly is being destroyed by overdevelopment. The special districts legislation will mandate preservation of existing tenement buildings. The current stock of old law and new law tenements are typically comprised of rent-regulated apartments. And these historic tenement developments are the traditional development model in Lenox Hill and Yorkville. So the richness of this housing stock, together with rent regulations, has provided for affordability. This existing tenement development still is typical of the avenues, though of course under great pressure. And therefore, an important component of the special districts will be to preserve the existing old law and new law tenements outright. This is a key requirement and it's necessary in conjunction with the 210-foot height limit. The third component of the special districts will provide support for small business development and operations. Between the current pressures of large developments on the one hand and internet-based marketing on the other, mom and pop retail and locally controlled retail are severely threatened. Yet these local businesses are a lifeline of the community in terms of goods and services, as well as character. In response, the City Council released its plan for local retail entitled Planning for Retail Diversity / Supporting New York City's Neighborhood Businesses. And this is actually great policy. It directly addresses concerns we have for Lenox Hill and Yorkville retail, and particularly the businesses along the principal avenues. It's a broad document with considered strategies to support and enhance small businesses. It advocates zoning protections and policy recommendations. And really, it's exactly what we're looking to achieve here. It defines a comprehensive program of zoning and land use provisions, of economic development initiatives, tax policy and financial initiatives, and related policy provisions and incentives. So we're largely aligned with the analysis and prescriptions, and we'll look to incorporate its provisions in the new special districts. A brief summary of the zoning and land use components include enhanced commercial districts to require retail space on the ground floor of new developments. It mandates inclusion of commercial space and restrictions on the size of storefronts, particularly concerning spread of large-scale retailers and bank branches. And in general, it's patterned after, but improves upon similar legislation that's currently existing on Amsterdam and Columbus Avenues on the Upper West Side. It also considers zoning restrictions on chain stores and restaurants and other components outside of zoning regulations, including tax policy and financial incentives, such as tax abatement and direct subsidy to incentivize property owners to offer affordable long-term commercial leases, and reform of the commercial rent tax to specifically help small independent retailers in Manhattan below 96th Street maintain profitability. So in terms of our current status now, we have submitted pre-applications to the DCP to initiate special district approval process and met with DCP to fine-tune those initial applications. And I noticed Tony Lechuga has been on this call too, and I would thank him in advance for his help in coordinating with that. And I look forward to more in the future. Because, at this time we're incorporating those responses and we're revising the pre-applications. And after the new year with the change in government, we will submit our first revisions to the pre-application process. So given the out-of-pace scale development in Yorkville in particular, these special districts are a direct response to public pressures. And timely enactment of these proposals is becoming increasingly important. And there's a groundswell of concern to address the needs of these areas in a way that will support a vibrant, thriving community, predictability, and benefit for all. So we, on behalf of the committee, we remain very interested in your views as we move forward together. and welcome discussion. Thank you. So that concludes
Okay.
my prepared presentation.
Thank you, Tuck. And if are there any questions first from the public? I don't see any yet. Give you all a minute.
If you wish to speak, please press the raise hand button on Zoom if you wish to speak, and then I'll unmute you.
Wow. Oh, okay. Let's see. Let me just make sure we don't have any other. All right. So let's just go to board members. Sherry, your hand is raised. I think Zachary, if you could unmute her, that would be great.
Hi, Tuck. Thank you so much for your very detailed presentation. I'm just wondering if you could walk us through what is the next steps to see this become reality. I'm sure there's a lot of red tape we have to go through. So where do we go next, and then from where do we go? What is the process in getting this approved?
Well, there's many steps to this process. The pre-application submittals are really very initial. They kind of begin the discussion process with the Department of City Planning, and scope is a big word applied many ways later in the process, but in common usage here, they just explore the basics of the proposal and what the content is, so that coordinating with the Department of City Planning, we can get an idea of what it is we're actually proposing. And also in particular explain to them and solicit their feedback and cooperation, and ultimately we hope support. This is a big initiative. What follows from that are what is known as interdivisional meetings. That is representatives within the Department of City Planning from the variety of perspectives that are brought up by this proposal would meet, would review. Our representatives, that is representatives for the Zoning and Development Committee and Community Board 8 would be present as well. Right now, as a planner putting together these ideas in coordination with the committee, I can cover the big idea vision of it, but very soon we will encounter environmental considerations and legal land use attorney type considerations, and together those other professionals would coordinate with me and with DCP in interdivisional meetings to review this process and fashion a coordinated proposal. Following that, let me just pull out my thumbnail for it because I can be very succinct that way. Bear with me. Yes. Following that, there's a number of contingencies, but basically this is all part of the City Environmental Quality Review process, the SEQR process, CEQR process. Following that, there's a determination made. An environmental assessment will also be prepared, a very detailed document describing all the aspects, and also a document called a revised worst case scenario, reasonable worst case scenario will be prepared. Again, analyzing in great detail what the consequences would be from this action. Intention is to identify the worst thing that possibly happened and work backwards from there. Together, though, the environmental assessment documents and the reasonable worst case scenario can comprise several hundred pages of analysis and documentation on substantial amounts of work. And particularly, again, we're covering some 36 blocks of north, south, and 4 east, west, some almost 300 city blocks of land in this proposal. So make no small plans, as they say. But that's the outline of the initial phase of the review process. It is expected / hoped, but reasonably expected, that at that point it would be identifiable enough to move out of the seeker process, and with the sense that there's various classifications, but that's approved on that basis and would move to the city council and ULURP planning process. The alternative is it would be decided that there's greater environmental impacts than we think would be entailed by this, and in which case you'd have to do an environmental impact statement. That's not really likely, since what we're proposing is conservative, not any greater work. So anyhow, and then from that point, it would move to the ULURP process through the city council eventually. So I hope that's sufficient detail and outline to satisfy to give you the big picture.
Okay, we have Michelle. You could.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that presentation, Tuck. Do you have insight at this moment as to who our opposition will be and how active they are at the moment in either specifically opposing this or actively proposing their own plans?
Somewhat. You know, and I'm going to, in a moment, defer to Anthony and Elizabeth and others on the board who are also very in touch with these questions. But let me just make an initial response to that. I don't want to say historically, but in the past several years, when in the face of particularly super talls, but just out of scale development in general, the notion of regulating building heights has been discussed a lot. Not only through the Zoning and Development Committee and the Community Board, but all the allied neighborhood groups that have, you know, great activity and role and so forth, Friends and Civitas and others. And there's a lot of discussion about what's the right height. I want to reiterate, there are, on the Lenox Hill and Yorkville neighborhoods, there are currently no actual building height limits. It surprises people to realize that, but they're not. Heights are regulated through other mechanisms, through massing and bulk prescriptives. But as we've all seen, those are manipulatable and you can end up with super tall buildings. So the sense is to, you know, the response is that we need building heights, that building heights are appropriate. They exist in most codes in most places, but not in this instance. And not elsewhere in the city for certain locations, but in any case, it has a great impact in this community. I want to add at this juncture too, just as an assessment kind of, or motivational kind of point, is that the Upper East Side is one of the densest communities in all of New York City, if not the densest, in terms of population density per area, given area, which is to underscore the great need for thoughtful, appropriate regulation of this. Okay, back to the direct response though. There's a number of different heights that people suggest for various reasons. 210 feet is a very well considered number. It's very well established. It's part of why it's considered though. It's very well established. It has precedent in various other areas, including in effect the Western Avenues, the Upper East Side part, not Lenox Hill and Yorkville, and various other issues. So you can pick out other numbers for other reasons. But an important criteria of 210 feet, not only is a height limit, is there very established precedents, but you can, within appropriate development models, realize the full allowable floor area ratio, that is the full allowable building density under the code. So in that sense, we're not limiting development by using that number. We're limiting the type of development. There's some developments, there's some proposals that say, well, it needs to be 350 feet, so you can do that. It needs to be 350 feet if it's a tower on a base model of development. That's true, which we're not proposing. We're proposing a development model called massing and setback height, and that results in a lower squatter building. Fine, but within that provision, you can achieve the entire development potential. I'm getting a little long-winded about this, but there are many parts of it. I'll point out that in that regard, A really interesting building to consider as an example in this is one that's pretty well known now. It's called the Hallworth, but it's recently finished. The building on Lexington Avenue and 86th Street is, by all reasonable estimates, a large building, and that's built within a 210-foot limit, I believe. Anyhow, that said, there are a lot of different perspectives on what that is and who's vested interests against it. Well, people who build big buildings are not going to like this plan. People are in the business of making very tall buildings for very strong economic reasons, are going to oppose it, presumably. And so that's the other extreme. So there's a variety of perspectives in between that. But perhaps Anthony or Elizabeth or perhaps Elaine has their finger on the pulse in another way that they'd like to speak to also.
No, I mean, I think you answered it well. I'm not sure. As you said, there may be opposition to specific aspects of this, but in terms of a sort of generalized opposition to height limits, I don't know for sure who would object to it, except for, as Tuck pointed out, people who want to build very tall buildings. I don't know if Elizabeth, do you? Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, I think that obviously the real estate board is not going to jump for joy at the idea of this. But I think over the many, many years, after a great deal of effort, we have achieved things that were opposed by them. And I think we haven't had much support from city planning, to put it politely. But I think persistence, and I think that the arguments are very strong in the favor of the 210, preserving the tenements, and local retail. So I think when people say, well, you can't put affordable housing in what we've proposed, you can, and we can demonstrate that. So it takes persistence. I'll have to admit that. But I think if you're doing the right thing, which I think we are, we just got to persist.
Thank you. Okay, so we have Alita. Zachary, if you could unmute her, that would be great.
Hi, thank you, Anthony. I can't overestimate the need to employ affordable housing here, not just because of city planning's interest in it, but because the next mayor has said that he wants to target wealthy white neighborhoods and allow for upzonings if there is more affordable housing. I think our track record on losing affordable housing is really relevant and vital. Also, small businesses don't seem to matter, at least to this administration. And the next mayor supports the Soho NoHo upzoning, where there are going to be 25,000 square foot big box retail stores as of right. So the idea that small businesses will be uprooted in Chinatown, where whole buildings will be destroyed or replaced in Soho NoHo, is irrelevant to the next mayor or to this mayor. And Adams has already said he supports the Soho NoHo plan. So I think focusing on what is going to be lost with these buildings is really important, because their idea that they're getting affordable housing just makes no sense. That's all. Thank you.
Can I ask you something, Alita, about that too? I mean, I really appreciate what you're saying, and then I think it's probably the biggest hurdle in some respects. You think height limits might be, but I think, well, they're both big hurdles. But the affordable housing is a really pressing question and has such political implications. I wonder what role the fact that this is the densest district in the city will play in that. I mean, we can debate the economics of things. Yorkville and Lenox Hill are not the same economics as the Upper East Side, that is the western half of the community district, by a long shot. I mean, they're not low-income districts, and they're getting ever less so, but they're not the same thing that's meant by the Upper East Side. So, but they're dense. They're denser than anywhere else too. So, what is the rationale that? How can we address that? I guess is.
I wish I knew, because it certainly didn't matter as an argument. I think there were other reasons with the blood center, the fact that the neighborhood is so dense and they were putting this awful building into that spot. Even people who are in favor of large scale developments were opposed to that building, but it didn't seem to matter. What they're doing with Soho NoHo doesn't seem to matter. The density, I think people outside the district perceive the Upper East Side from Fifth Avenue to the river as one district with the same characteristics from east to west. And so it becomes really important to differentiate it. George Janes had done a study on loss of affordable housing to show that the Upper East Side lost 14,000 units, more by far than any other district in the city. And I think that that's important to show. The idea that these buildings, personally, I've always thought that these buildings have implications for neighborhoods, that there are economic ripple effects of the kind of upzoning, in the sense of pushing out small businesses, putting a lot of economic and financial pressure on owners of small buildings to sell out or to warehouse them. So I think all of that information just needs to be shown, but they look at us with a very, very, very broad brush. But DCP, but remember when we were there at DCP, they said that if we could show that that putting a height limit would not limit affordable housing, that they would work with us. I remember very clearly. So if we could show how much we lost despite these buildings and that we haven't gained anything, then there's no reason for them to oppose the height limit because of all the things that make sense about it, is what I would do, I guess. That's the lawyer in me, sorry.
I'd like to, there's so much to this. And I mean, it's a very interesting and interrelated set of, well, facts as well as opinions about things. I want to speak to the facts a little bit more, though. There's the mechanism by which the super tall and the whole mechanism of zoning lot mergers has the effect of reducing existing tenements. If people are going to turn around and say, well, we will provide an FAR2 affordable housing benefit with any large development, for the area where there were formerly tenements, it's a net loss in well-regulated housing. Interestingly enough, and I just want to run through this because, again, there are these ideas that undergird this, and there's a difference between the facts and what's common knowledge in the community or the city. If you take the typical tenements along the avenues in Yorkville and Lenox Hill are 4-, 5-, and 6-story buildings. If you consider that the first floors are going to be retail, then the second, third, fourth, fifth, then they're 2-, 3-, 4-story buildings. If you consider the average 4 stories of affordable housing in a tenement space that way, it ends up, and I can show you this on paper, it ends up being an FAR 2.8 in affordable housing. FR 2.8 versus FR 2 is approximately 40% greater. Just this arithmetic is 40% greater affordable housing. That's just by keeping the existing housing stock, aside from any of the other benefits that has for the community. But I think it's an important fundamental that needs to be carried along in communications with the city and the press and the mayor and however far we can go. But clearly we need to construct very concise, incisive, effective rationale about that issue, because those are the facts. There's more I could say, but part of the reason, the other thing about, so I'll say one more. The other reason I want to incorporate the preservation of the tenements is that it obviates the fungibility, the commercial value of zoning lot mergers, and it lessens the pressure on taking away affordable housing that way, because you can realize the entire development potential within the existing footprint of a given site. That's what I'm saying.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thanks, Alita. Next, we have Judy Schneider.
Thank you, Mr. Eckstein. That was very interesting. I have a question. I followed you about the avenues, but I didn't follow you if that's going to affect from 59th to 69th Streets, which is the length of our community board on all of those avenues.
Well, yes, it does in a nutshell.
Okay.
However, obviously there are existing conditions, and the vast majority of, I won't put it that way. There are many taller buildings that are outside the.
Yes, I understand that.
Yeah, I'm sure you do.
And then I just have one other question. What happens with, we're talking about stores and more small businesses. What happens? We happen to have one existing very large box store of 95,000 square feet near us on First Avenue. What would happen to that, let's say, if this zoning was passed next year? What would happen to that piece of property? When the lease ran out, would that no longer be allowed to be rented that way? How does it work?
Typically, these kind of things are grandfathered. So long as there's not a change in use and occupancy, they're typically allowed to be grandfathered, and it would be a major change and not supportable given conventional processes to make those kind of regulations retroactive. They would affect anything new or anything for which underlying enablements change, like certificates of occupancy kind of thing, changes that would require a change in certificate of occupancy must conform, that sort of thing. But grandfathered uses are very typically considered to stay with the property.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay, let me do Elaine first, and I'll come back to you, Michelle. Thank you. Elaine.
Thank you. I just wanted to comment that the whole plan is to preserve affordable housing, and the numbers have been given on FAR if we lose those sites. And we know we have lost so many sites now because we've not been able to move forward. But the bigger issue for me is not just keeping affordable housing, expanding it, but ensuring that the people in our community who have lived here all their lives, whether it's a 5-story walk-up or a 3-story walk-up, any change to developing a high-rise that would include affordable housing and saying that those people who are displaced will be able to move in is fallacy. We saw this on 2nd Avenue, what happened with the subway there and all the displacement. So what we're losing is really a community, a context for those who, through their lives, tried to make their neighborhood better. And so I think the plan looks to preserve those who are currently here and then providing for others to come in. And one of the big questions, and I have raised this and people are frustrated with my asking, is we have HPD should be monitoring affordable housing in existing construction that's going on. There is no mechanism. I've said before, 200 East 79th Street is supposed to have affordable housing inside. There's no record of it. This goes on, and that has to stop. So we need not only to understand what goes on when there's new development, but also how we preserve those who are in our neighborhood. That's what we're looking at. It is a disgrace that the city and elected officials allowed affordable units that belonged in our neighborhood through various construction and programs not to stay here, but to move to other boroughs because, and I testified at the state level on this, it was too expensive to build in this neighborhood. That is not an excuse, not an excuse to deny people the opportunity to live in Yorkville or Lenox Hill. It is a disgrace that went on, and we hope it will stop with preserving what we have, and then any new development comes in with affordable housing on site, which is the law. Thank you.
Thank you, Elaine. I think Elaine really makes a very good point about displacement, and one of the reasons why this is such a can be such a powerful engine for retaining existing affordable housing. I have one little question for you, Tuck, and that is, I know at one point I thought we were considering combining the two special districts, and rather than treating them as separate special districts. And so perhaps if you could address that briefly, that would be helpful.
I'd be glad to. They were developed, the problems, the conditions are largely the same from 59th Street to 96th Street. Obviously, some of the built environment varies significantly in some areas, but the issues are largely the same. That said, the communities have a different history and a different character, and they're kind of more manageable identity units. As historically, Lenox Hill is separate from Yorkville. Yorkville has its character, Lenox Hill has its, and they're entities, conceptual entities, planning, community entities that kind of exist on their own. So we ultimately, on that basis, made the decision, and again, also not to make it just quite so huge, more manageable, to treat them as two separate allied efforts, but two separate special districts. That said, Anthony, when we then have spoken with DCP, they asked us, recognizing the reasons why there would be two separate districts, they asked us to combine the applications into one application because it's one effort. They are pretty much identical in terms of their intent and character and documentation and so forth. And it made sense for them. I think it was helpful for them to consider them as one. And so, so going forward, one of the things we're doing is combining the two in terms of the application, even though they are, so it's one application to
two districts.
Two districts, right.
Great, thank you, Tuck.
Sure.
All right, so let's go back to Michelle and then Rita. You could unmute Michelle, Zachary.
Michelle, I unmute.
No, she's still muted. Did he ask her to? I'm
Mhm.
sure he did.
Yeah. I'll try it again.
Okay.
Michelle, you were sent an invitation to unmute. Or I
Are you not getting it, or?
I guess she's not getting it.
Because, yeah.
It's not like she's frozen. She's vigorously shaking her head appropriately.
Right.
All right, let me go to Rita and then we'll come back. We'll come back to you,
I
Michelle.
want to say, Michelle, are there local controls on your machine that are keeping you from doing it, or is your? Okay.
No.
So I asked Rita to unmute.
Yeah, let's ask Rita. Oh, go
Yeah.
ahead, Rita.
I'm unmuted. Tuck, thank you so much for this presentation. I've been working with affordable housing for years, and there are a lot of elements as to why it's not working today. I'm going to use where I live. It's a Mitchell-Lama building. All the buildings here were Mitchell-Lama buildings, but the church was very involved in making sure that the people in this area, of course, they had a reason for it. They wanted to keep their parishioners here.
Mhm.
They actually went and fought very hard for affordability, and they won. Roosevelt Island was originally, the entire island was supposed to be affordable, right?
Yeah.
They were also supposed to have a movie there, but affordable, I honestly don't have a head for numbers, but there are certain numbers that absolutely gall me, and that was on building number 8 on Roosevelt Island, that the affordable housing, they got the abatements for affordable housing for including them, and the affordable housing was 185% of the AMI. Well, the AMI is so that people in the area can move up, move in, move whatever it is, but we just let it go. Supposing we work toward having a cap on AMI that unless you include anything between 30 and 100%, you don't get an incentive for affordable housing, because it's not affordable. Who's it affordable for? And I'm sure you've heard that long before this, but I think that we need to do some work about affordability. I don't know, does HPD decide what the percentage is going to be, or does the developer go to HPD and say, I want XYZ, and they get XYZ? And there's something not working, and we know it, but I think we have to take a different tact. It's not working. I think we have to realize, and we are part of it.
Mhm.
We are, we sit here and we study and we listen to everybody's stories, and they're hair raising, absolutely hair raising. And I must say that I'm nominating this man on First Avenue and the corner of 86th Street and First Avenue, who absolutely would not give in to a very large developer, and the developer now has to build around his tenement, because he stuck it out. They will make his life miserable. They say, oh, you want to stay? Wait until the jackhammers come. But
Well, this happened, but yeah.
We need to do more work.
I really appreciate what you're saying. Our basic philosophy about developing this, there's something that's very idealistic about this work. We envision something better and try to fit it in with what's realistic, and in so doing, kind of pull the whole thing forward, just as a basic kind of philosophical stance. And with that spirit, I would like to ask ourselves what more we can do as far as incentives or requirements. We're bound by economic rights. We're bound by all the premises of development rights and arguments and legislation and all that precedes this. But this is a chance to make good policy, I think, and fight for it. And so other aspects, preserving tenements is a, is a defensible and reasonable thing to do. There's also a lot of precedent that's done in other special districts, and I think particularly Clinton and Little Italy, and I think there are others as well. I mean, there's some precedent there, and it's effective. But what else could we do and carry forward that's appropriate with this? If this is such a desirable area to develop, people aren't clamoring to develop in pick your outer borough and pick your location. They're clamoring to develop here because of the property values and the desirability in various ways. Well, that should come along with perhaps a different set of expectations. And maybe we can expand this proposal in certain judicious ways along those lines.
Thank
I
you.
don't have a ready answer.
That was an appropriately enigmatic and provocative answer. And I see Michelle's back. I see Michelle's back with us, so perhaps we can unmute her. Give it a shot. Yes.
Yes, thank you very much. I signed off and came back on. Apparently it froze, but anyway, here I am now. I'm sorry I missed what Tuck just said, but I'll just go to what my point was. I can't address this. I didn't hear it. I'm sorry to say. But when I spoke previously and I talked about who might oppose this, who would be against it, I wasn't talking about the real estate lobby. I had assumed that. What my point was, the local preservation organizations, block associations, community organizations, some of them have different ideas as to what the height limit might be. And depending on how active they are in promoting what they think, insofar as it may differ from what we're proposing, I would hope that we could bring them along so that we are all on the same page here, because my assumption with the community organizations and the preservation organizations, correct me if I'm wrong, but my assumption is that even if they have some thoughts about a higher height limit, that they certainly wouldn't be adverse or opposed or in any way adversely affected if we actually got our wish of the 210 feet. So I think that it would be really in everyone's best interest to speak with one voice. And to the extent that we can meet with them and bring them along or ask them to come and talk to us specifically to address these issues. Some are on this call, I'm sure, but I'm not suggesting that they're prepared to discuss it tonight. So I'm not asking that anybody be put on, in the hot seat, but I'm just suggesting that going forward, those who have made presentations to us about their ideas, if they could come back to us and speak to us about ways that they could hopefully support what we're doing. Because clearly, if we're all speaking with one voice, and if city planning gets text amendments that vary, from within the same community, that's of no benefit to anybody. So I would hope that maybe the co-chairs can take the lead on that, maybe ask organizations to come next time, talk to us, maybe be prepared about how we could all sort of go forward together on this, because I think that's what we're going to need. And their interest is in affordable housing as well as density and all that. Their interest is the same as ours. Mm-hmm. So we're asking for the least. Some of them are asking for a little more. I don't see that anybody would be adverse to us getting the 210, and maybe somehow we can find a way to bring them along and talk to us about it. So that was really what I meant when I said who might be in opposition. Rebney is a given. Yeah. I wasn't talking about that.
Thank you, Michelle.
No, I really appreciate that. I strongly agree with you too. I'm completely willing to discuss and debate, and particularly before we go public in a sense, this is all public, I understand. But when we can talk amongst friends and allied interests and hash it out. Really, I'm very in favor of that process.
Terrific.
Great.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think
Now,
that
Elizabeth, yeah. Go.
I've met with organizations who are trying for, the higher limits, and I think the reason that they gave was, well, you're apt to get the higher limits. Now, I think that we could perhaps persuade them, because if you want to propose something that all the powers that be would give you, go in with 1,000 feet, because you're guaranteed to get that. But I think we would, I hope, persuade them to abandon that approach, because it's not worth bothering.
And what's the right number? Right. Well, one of the things that were along those lines that I think, speaking to the benefit of communication and discussion, is I know there's one group that was advocating for 350 feet. I kind of mentioned that in my presentation, and saying that this is what we need to achieve a building height. And well, if you're going to have a tall, skinny building, you need 350 feet to achieve a possible floor area ratio. And it needs to be discussed about why is that the premise of a position. The premise can be what's developable. It doesn't have to be what's developable as a tower on a base kind of model. That's just an example. Anyhow.
Okay, let's move to Marco. And just before, you can go ahead and mute Marco, but before we do, I think that we're going to be talking about this a lot and for a long time as this develops. And so, since we had already had the public, and then normally we do the public and then the board members, committee members, board members. I think I'm going to ask if it's all right if we move the agenda after Marco. I see some nodding.
Thank you.
Sorry,
Thank you.
Leah, Wendy, and Margaret, but perhaps we will definitely catch you in January. Marco.
Thank you, Anthony. Talk. I think I had to apologize because I don't have time at this moment. But when I was ready, you were very busy. But I think where I reach with my conclusions with the graphic that I sent to you, it shows that the diversity or the misconception that many people has about our community. The idea was, myself, even I was confused at the beginning, but the point is, in this case, what I found it is very interesting, a lot of things. For instance, in affordable housing, there are some projects that they're supposed to maintain affordable housing. And that will be one of the discussions to see where are those affordable housing, because they receive a lot of floor area. It wasn't because you just have it and then go back to the regular market. That is one of the discussions that when I saw POPs, when I saw HPD, when I saw the medical developments, when I see all of them together, then I was planning to write something, but I'm busy at this time, but I think very soon I will discuss that. And the issue, what I perceive is you raised extremely important points. One is we are the most populated community board. I think that I found it myself shocking in that part.
And it's important too, yeah.
Extremely important. Extremely important. That I think this is the best argument that we can have right now, because some people they said, "Oh, you just built the Second Avenue subway." Well, look at the density. We are the most dense in the population. We are the most density in the city and maybe in the nation. That's what I hear. So that is one extremely important for those people that they don't want support or those people that want to fight for 210. The second part is density. Density, when I'm talking about, is the developer, they try to reduce the density to the minimum. Indeed, most of the developments, they just develop 1/4 of what they supposed to have it. Why? Because they target extremely wealthy residents. So having this kind of situation, it will impact other incomes such as the middle income families. So we have to produce middle income housing, we have to produce low income housing, we have to produce all the spectrum of housing. And that is, I think we had to raise another discussion why we need to have 210. When you see the graphic that I sent it to you, it was shocking for me that the number of buildings that actually that overpass 210 is POPs reach, I think, 38 buildings and HPD 48 buildings. And the medical institution, they pass, I think they are smaller. And actually the real developments, the developers, is just only 11 or 12, 12 buildings. That is with the information that I have according to the Department of City Planning. Probably today is a little bit more, but that is the numbers that I was analyzing. And I think that is the discussion for our defense, why we need 210 and why we need to have not only affordable housing at this level, we have to reach to the middle income housing. Because the point is very simple. If you neglect middle income families, the middle income family will put pressure on those people on those rent control or rent stabilization projects. And then the reduction of affordability, it will decrease dramatically. So we have to be very careful to maintain a balance in the market. We have to create balance in the production of housing for all types of incomes. Obviously, our target is low-income families, our target, but the problem is, if we produce affordable housing, one of the biggest problems that we have is we don't have vacant land to produce affordable housing, except those NYCHA. But NYCHA, they are misusing the lot. They are properly misguiding, and they try to go in different directions. But that is another discussion. My discussion I would like to raise is the issue of affordability and density. Density we have to discuss deeper, because density, if we don't produce affordable housing for all incomes, we're gonna get in another kind of housing crisis. And so I think that is the only point I would like to say it. And by the way, HPD, usually when you file any project, you know very well, I don't know if you did or not, talk, you had to file in DOV, and DOV, they send to HPD, actually the plan examiners that HPD has, they make the approval or disapprovals, and then we can obtain the information. But that information is not available for all of that. And I think I make my points. And I agree with Elizabeth when she said we already discussed with the community organizations, and we can persuade, that's fine. But they have a very strong opposite direction where we're going, and we have to maintain our 210 because that is the position of the community board. Thank you.
Thank you, Marco. I think we're now going to move, I think Elizabeth is going to take the next item.
Yes, the next item is enforcing allowable working time under building permits. We discussed our request to be pre-warned or notified when people apply for out of hours working permits. But during those discussions, people pointed out that we have a big problem of people with building permits waking people up about 4 hours early in the morning and keeping them awake all night. And I just wanted, we thought we should discuss, should we write a letter to Department of Rules? I must say, I shared with the members of the community, the committee, the letter we got back about pre-notification, which told us at a great length that we officially get informed when people get the permit. And of course, that wasn't what we asked for. But I wanted to know what people thought we should do. And I did ask Zachary. I've had a lot, and a lot of committee members told me we have a lot of complaints about from people in the public about it. But Zachary, did you find out anything about what the community board office has had in the way of complaints?
Hi. So basically, we really do not get many complaints at all regarding construction after hours. The last complaint that we have received was in October, and the constituent wanted to know why construction was occurring on a Saturday, and this was located on 323 East 79th Street. And what we did was I guided the constituent through the DOB's BIS website, which is the building information search website, where you are able to look at all permits, including after hour variances as well. I guided the constituent on the website, and we found that the construction did have an after hours variance for that Saturday. Also today we had our district service cabinet meeting where DEP provided the data on the top 30 complaints in the community district itself. So DEP had a total of 425 complaints within the Community Board 8's district. Out of those 425 complaints, the top complaint was noise related to construction before and after hours, which accounted for 149 out of the 425 complaints. Mind you, this can be constituents calling 301s themselves without contacting us or contacting their respective council members. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now,
Just one. I'm sorry, Elizabeth, because I had a conversation with Will about this week before last, maybe, and I think it would be in the service of the community for us to mention that the best way to make sure that the district office is involved is to make your 311 call, make note of the complaint number, and then pass that information on to Will and Zachary, and then they can continually bug the building department until they do something.
That's completely right, Anthony. The DOB, and if they're here, they can speak for themselves, but they're data-driven on how they issue these permits. And when there are complaints, and they hear from us, they hear from the council members' offices, they will actually stop issuing those AH fees. But until they have the data that these 311 complaints create, they're going to keep issuing them. So that's why we encourage everybody, call 311, make sure it's not just a noise complaint, make sure it is a complaint for work after hours or before hours, and that will be the thing that the DOB uses as a metric for making their future decisions.
Okay, let's see if we have any members of the public who would like to comment. Seeing none, we'll start with Sherry Weiner.
I don't think we should evaluate the number of complaints based on the number that come to the community board. I don't think people even think to go to the community board. I know I had an issue and I didn't even know to come to that the community board would be available to advocate for me. I just went to my city council member. And I believe in our last conversation, we were discussing if the community board wanted to take on the, I'll say, responsibility to be a clearinghouse for this. And if this is something that we want to do, we need to let the community know that we're here for them. I mean, even Will's suggestion to call 311 and then give it to the community board. I don't think, I mean, this is an issue I've raised before. I don't think people understand how they can utilize the community board. And I think it behooves us to educate the public as to the service that we can provide. And this may be a perfect one where if, through our usual means of communications, we let people know if they have a noise issue due to construction, that they should notify the community board, and then we would go forward and advocate for them. But the fact that there were so few to the community board, I don't think is an indication of the number of complaints. I just think people think people wouldn't even know to contact us. So I think we should decide what role we want to play in this. Do we want to be a clearinghouse or do we not? And then follow up appropriately. Thanks.
But I think we also want to make sure it's one thing to know and make a complaint. It's another thing to get them to start enforcing this. I don't even know, perhaps we should find out if you work before hours or after hours, is there a fine? If so, how much? And if it's not enough, maybe we should ask that the fine be increased. If there's no incentive to obey the law, I think the human race is apt to ignore it if it suits them. So I think
that's a great
somehow enforcement has to be very much part of what we ask for. Okay, Michelle.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Part of the problem that I've personally noticed is, let's say they have a permit to start at 7 o'clock. The problem exists in their setup very often, and it's just as noisy. Very often the trucks, the beep, beep, beep of the trucks backing up, they'll come, and the workmen will all come on site at 6:30. Not formally start until 7, but the noise they create when they are arriving is just as noisy as the actual construction. So I think if we follow up with another letter in response to the letter they sent us, at the very least, we would ask that a directive go out when they issue the permits for a starting time, that in fact, that also includes the arrival time. That just because they don't use the jackhammer before 7 o'clock, that doesn't mean that they haven't started. I have been awakened many, many, many times with setup. And I think that's a very big part of it. And I wonder if we can specify that in a response to their response. I think we should have a response to their response for whatever else you want to include in it. But that should certainly be, the start time should include arrival.
That's a good idea. Thank you very much, Michelle. Next is Elaine Walsh.
Thank you. I agree with what has been said. I know that the borough president had set limits with Department of Buildings and all the city agencies that were giving permits on time limits and working after hours and on weekends. There seems to be a lack of monitoring by the city agencies regarding construction. 2, we did many years ago, and I will ask the staff now to go back and see where it is in our archives, that we had a discussion on start times and the prep, and that the prep with the beep, beep, beeps going back, or the vendors coming to serve food, was not allowed until the start time. I think it was 7 o'clock. Do not hold me. It could be 8 o'clock. But that they could not start nor have any support services. So I think we need to go back to that, pull it out, and I would hope we can do that within the week, and then send that with another letter to the appropriate agencies. This has been going on, whether it's the private school on East End Avenue, or a construction site on Park, or 79th Street, or 86th Street. They've all been in violation, and they just turn their head. It is the obligation of the community board to now step up and get the data and contact the city agencies. Indeed, let me say, no one calls the community board. You know why? Because the people I know who have called are told, don't call us on this issue, call 311 and then get us the tracking number. So maybe that's the reason you don't get calls at the community board, because our residents are tired after they've gone through a 311 process to then have to go back to the community board and give the number. There's no advocacy by the board, and I think it's something we need to look at. How do we as a community board advocate rather than delegate it back to the consumer to figure it out and then tell us the information? So I would like us to look at that, not necessarily in our committee, but in other committees. What are we doing to serve people who are now very, very upset? Thank you.
Thank you, Elaine. Alita Camp now.
Thank you. Well, the last week when I was chair, I got an email from DOB that the building going up on 200 East 83rd Street, I think it might be a related building, I'm not sure, Casira is the lobbyist, was not going to be receiving after hours variances without going to the community board. Needless to say, that upset Casira a lot. Nevertheless, they kept getting after hours variances, and they, as I understand it, never had to come to the community board. I don't understand what happened. So what this says to me is that it's the amount of money that's going to a lobbyist who can then influence the city, because there was no reason after that email from the DOB where Casira lied and said, and I'm sure Will probably remembers this, that there was a failure to communicate between me and Will with all the onus on me. And I reminded them that the only emails I ever got were announced, dear neighbor. So they lied about how much they were communicating with the community board, and they still continued to get after hours variances despite an emphatic email from the DOB. So I think lobbyists matter a great deal in this city. We don't have one, they do. And so I don't know what power we have. It's disconcerting, it's dismaying, and I'll just end it there, because what everyone says matters. And this has been an issue since Bloomberg extended the hours of construction. And it just doesn't seem to matter what the community thinks. Sorry. And thank you.
Thank you, Alita. Valerie Mason.
Thank you, Elizabeth. First, I wanted to just ask Zach, of these 175 complaints, were they, or whatever the number was, were they all related to one particular building, or could you figure out, or were there like 3 major offenders, or were these spread out over everything?
So the data provided was spread out over everything regarding multiple buildings on different complaints.
we had I mean, there wasn't any kind of concentration with respect to any particular building. It was just random. This building is making noise.
That I can't really.
That's just not the data that they were providing us this morning.
Oh, okay. So they don't do it building by building. They just tell you that we got 175.
I mean, that information is available because you can go online and see where the 3-in-1 data, there's a map for it, but they were just providing us all of the DEP related complaints. So, you know, it was I think, Zach, you can pull up the number. It's 400 something complaints for the month of October total that DEP received. And they were just showing how they addressed them. They're not showing us, the question wasn't posed, where are AHVs being complained about? They just provide that data, just like the NYPD provides that data for, you know, traffic at my DSC. Does that make sense?
Well, I mean, I guess it makes sense, but I'm asking whether we should be making a further inquiry and telling them the data that they're giving us is useless, because how are we supposed to, if we were going to advocate on behalf of various buildings, we wouldn't even know who to write to because we don't have the data telling us, like, there's one particular construction site that seems to be an issue. So that, I mean, so I would think that we would have, I mean, they must be able to pull it together. I mean, when they take somebody's complaint, they ask them the building site where the noise is coming from. So, I mean, I would think we should ask that question. The other thing I think we probably should do, perhaps, Will, is at your, you know, reports at our full board meeting, we just announce so that the public knows that if they're having construction complaints, that they should, if it's a noise complaint, they should, and it has to do with construction, they need to characterize it as a construction noise complaint, file the DOB, and even though it takes one more step, to then forward that to the office so that we can sort of, in some ways, if you will, monitor DOB or DEP, that we're getting our own independent data collection, and we can actually see, you know, what these complaints are. And then, I mean, once we have that data, I mean, you know, there are a lot of construction sites, but then we can intervene, maybe either getting the appropriate council person involved and or sending letters directly to the representatives. I mean, I understand that there are lobbyists, but I mean, I think we still have to, there's still a role that we can play in advocating for some of these construction sites. And I just wanted to say to Aline and some of the other people who made a point, we handled and we heard about various complaints, well, maybe 2 years ago, about basically concrete mixers coming out at 5 o'clock in the morning and making the concrete for 2 hours before the 7 o'clock start time started up on a Saturday morning. And to the previous points made, I would consider that work being done prior to the start time, that anything related to the construction, not just necessarily the construction workers starting to bang, is the work, and they're violating those permits. So anyway, I think there is more work that we can do, but I think, to Sherry's point, we need to let the community know what the proper procedure is and sort of backstop it. Because if you're telling me we got 170 or notification from the DEP and we don't have the same number of complaints in the community board office, then that's something we should be working on, because we should be able to be backing up the people who are making these complaints. Thanks.
Thank you. Next, who's next? Margaret Lehman. Are you a member of the public or a community board member?
I'm a member of the public, Elizabeth. I'm Maggie Lehman.
Oh,
is this only time period only for CB8 members to speak?
No, go ahead.
All right, thank you. I wanted to echo both what Valerie said and the prior, maybe Michelle's comments too. The extra step to put the burden on the public and the constituent to take that extra step, at least as a member of the public who does know the process and has followed it, because I'm aware of it. Even I find it burdensome and bureaucratic, and even I become stop the complaints because I see nothing accomplished from it. And all of you know how involved I am and have been for years. So imagine many of the public not as informed and not as persistent. If the effective way to get to the DOB is to get the complaint number from 311 and then pass it on to Community Board 8, then there has to be some follow-up with for the public to know, either that they see, that Saturday permits aren't handed out like bologna sandwiches 4 Saturdays in a month, and or they have to see that work doesn't start at 5 a.m., as Valerie just pointed out. Yeah, they mix the concrete at 5. They do it for 2 hours. They remove the toilets and empty them and insert them back. They do everything, all the staging for that day. So Valerie's right. It's anything related to construction. And they do the same thing at 9 and 10 at night. So I think, A, the public has to see something happening with all of that. And B, one of the Community Board 8 members made that great suggestion that Community Board 8 has to inform the public. Community Board 8 puts out its newsletters. They're great. It should lead with that. The Community Board 8 newsletter now has, for a very long time and for obvious reasons, led with COVID news, with the numbers, with the vaccines, where to get them. And I hear from dozens and dozens and dozens of people in our district that they no longer scroll down past that. They think that's all the newsletter is. So my suggestion is maybe we lead, maybe the CB8 newsletter leads now with, guess what? Here's what you do for construction noise complaints. Given that there are, what was our last count? 11 construction sites on York Avenue and 2nd Avenue, 1st Avenue and 2nd Avenue in a 10-block north-south radius. So maybe lead with that. And then my third request or suggestion is to somehow figure out how to, with Community Board 8's help, how to get the Department of Buildings to represent us, the public, instead of really representing the developers. That response to Elizabeth Ashby's letter that you said was extensive, Elizabeth, that answered, well, we do let the public know after the permit has been granted, as opposed to answering your letter, which was, let us know beforehand when a permit's being requested, so that we can then say, no, this doesn't work. You've given it 6 Saturdays in a row. You've given it 3 months in a row on a Saturday, the Saturday permits. I suspect that was just a tailored letter, not a tailored letter, a pro forma letter sent out. How do we get a city agency whose salaries we pay, they work for us. They don't work for the construction company and the developer. How to get that switched around so not only is the burden on the member of the public to make the complaint and to wait for the data to somehow meet the metric where, boom, we won't offer a 10th permit after hours. Not only are we fighting that, but we're fighting the pro-development in the Department of Buildings. That's just on the construction noise. I wanted to speak on the prior one, Anthony Cohen, the prior issue on the agenda. I appreciated that you're saying we have to move on, but maybe the full zoning board meeting, I can speak on the urban planning and the density and all of that. Thanks for your time, all of you.
Thank you. Okay, now, oh my word, we've got more. I'd like to wrap this up so that we can move on. We'll go to Marco and Alida, if you could make it quick and easy. Thank you. Marco first.
Thank you, Elizabeth. The point what I perceive right here is very simple. First of all, the commissioner, they follow instructions from the legislator, and the legislator established unclear regulations. What we had to do is, first of all, we are an advising committee. We cannot do anything. So the commissioner had more power than us. And the commissioner, he can do whatever he wants, whatever he interprets the law. Because the lobbyists go over there, make more common sense for them, they can do that. The issue right here is we need to change the regulations, and this is what we need now, our representatives, and change, legislate on the city council and enforce and establish what is the process that in order to be granted a variance. Because right now is in the hands of the commissioner. The commissioner can grant whatever he wants, and that is fine. It's nothing unlawful. What is unlawful, I think what is wrong is we had to go rather to DOB, we had to go to our reps. Our reps, they had to work it out, they had to legislate, and they've established a very clear issue, clear points of the regulations, and then we can request DOB to enforce properly. Secondly, my second point is there is a plan of mitigation for the noise. What we can ask DOB is to make available to all of us in the web. So the same they do with zoning, they can do with the not mitigation plan. So we can discuss with that document, and we can make a case against the commissioner, and then maybe we can get something. Otherwise, we are losing our time. We can keep talking different issues, but we're never gonna have any tangible issue right here. Thank you.
Thank you. Alida, and I'm afraid I must ask Anthony to take over because I have to depart. The dog walker's coming.
No problem.
I'll mute.
I'll be quick. And for some reason, I'm strolling down memory lane, but when ICON was putting up those buildings on 2nd Avenue, they came to the housing committee to ask for variances. And it took probably at least an hour in that housing committee meeting to get them to acknowledge that the reason they wanted the variances and the permits was to enable them to make more profit faster, because the faster they get the building done, the more money that they make. And so I don't know how that fits in with the DOB. It was hard to get them to acknowledge that, but that's certainly something that is really concerning when they disrupt so many people in order to do that. And then I have to agree with Maggie Lehman that maybe having even a separate e-blast with information on how the community board could help people with instructions on what to do, because as the DOB said, they give these permits with no requirements at all initially, and they only go back to the developer when there are complaints from the community. So people have to complain, and if people don't know how to complain or that they need to complain, then they won't, or they won't do it in a way that we could then follow up. So I don't know, and maybe it's best to get Julie Menon involved in this as soon as possible so that she understands what the issues are that the community confronts in terms of these permits. Thank you.
Thank you, Alida. And I think the next item on our agenda, which is mine, has to do with a proposal we heard about more or less for the first time at the October full board meeting, which was that councilperson Keith Powers was sponsoring legislation to essentially change the zoning resolution to allow music and dancing in all zoning districts. They're currently restricted to some commercial and manufacturing districts. This is the sort of use group 12, which is the cabarets. The cabaret law, which was passed in 1926, was repealed in 2017. And in the intervening 9 years, actually, no one has really paid much attention to it. I asked someone from Councilperson Powers' office to be here with us tonight, but because of staff disruption and everything else, they asked if they could put it off, and it's fine. And we will be scheduling them for our January meeting, at which time we'll learn more about what this proposal really means for all of us, and what it means for everybody, and most specifically what it means for us in a Community Board 8, aside from the possibility of there being a lot more noise outside of bars and restaurants. So I'd prefer it, if possible, Michelle, if we could hold this for the meeting when we have somebody here who really can explain it well. Is that okay?
Yeah, I won't discuss it in depth, Anthony, but I just want to make one comment. And the question is, who does Keith Powers think that he's representing? To come up with something like this and not come to the community in advance or get some kind of pulse of the community aside from just the restaurants would have been advisable before he went ahead with something like this. And at the same time, you might also want to call to task Ben Kalos, who came up, I don't know how far along this issue is or where he's proposed it, but he has a proposal to permit people who are leasing apartments to put up walls within the apartment. So in essence, you can turn one bedroom into a 2 or 2 into a 4, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, it's pretty common, without any reaching out to any agency in this city, for people who have L-shaped dining rooms to put up a wall and make it into, into a bedroom. I don't think anybody is particularly hysterical about that or will make a fuss about that. But once you have what he's proposing in legislation, and again, with no discussion of the community. So I wonder again who he thinks he's representing, aside from the fact that he may feel he needs another bedroom at this point in his family life. But that kind of a proposal that could just become law and override any rules of any buildings, rules of co-ops, rules of rentals, the landlords input, turn these apartments into multiple dwellings without any consideration. I think it's a crazy idea just talking about it, but certainly it's a crazy idea without investigation. So I think we've got 2 council members who I would have hoped would have been a little more solicitous of the community board and their constituents before they went ahead with such drastic proposals. So to the extent that I hope they both get that message, now I would say I welcome you having them come to talk to us in January. But I want them both to understand, at least I don't look favorably upon, not about the proposal. I am not in favor of the proposals, but aside from that, I'm not in favor of process. And I hope others on the board will join me in that at least.
Okay, thank you, Michelle. You had an applause for Marco in case you missed it. And so now Elizabeth, back to you for old business.
Sorry, I missed. So we're now at old business.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Yes. Under old business, Rachel Levy is going very kindly to bring us up to date on the blood center. And the news is bad, so everybody get out their handkerchiefs because we'll all be crying by the end of her presentation. Rachel, over to you.
Thanks.
She's here, I hope.
I am. I'm here.
Yes.
Yes. Hi, Elizabeth, and hi, everybody. Nice to see you. So, I will try do my best to summarize where we are with the blood center. And I would just say before I start that, many people on this call and many people in the larger community and others on the community board as well have been really intensely involved in this for the last year. And so I invite anybody else to, chime in our discussion because I'll do my best to recap things, but we've all been really hard at work on this over the last year. So, I think probably most people are aware last week, just before Thanksgiving, was the final vote at the City Council on the blood center proposal. It passed with quite a large margin. It did have some significant changes, most notably a significant height reduction. So the original proposal was set to be 334 feet, of which about a third was for the blood center and the other 2/3 was for Longfellow, the private developer. I probably don't need to go back over all the details. I think this committee is intimately aware of what the original proposal entailed. And I think that obviously it's not the result that we wanted. But I think that most people thought that with the political moment at which this was reaching the council in terms of the end of the administration and all of that, and the real momentum behind this proposal throughout the last year, I think that surprised everybody coming from the mayor's office. I think people really thought that this would sail through with no changes. And so, I think the fact that we were able to cut 100 feet off of the tower is significant and something that we should all feel good about. Even though, of course, this project is still too big, it still sets a dangerous precedent in terms of the zoning. One of the key issues, of course, was that this would be, and now is, the first rezoning of an R8B district on the Upper East Side to a C27 district, and really the first time of introducing this kind of high intensity commercial development on a residential block. At the end of the day, I think that this proposal just saw a lot of support from the mayor's office, from lobbyists that were, working every angle, I would say, in talking especially to every council member outside the district. Council member Kalos and our other local elected officials were extremely strong and presented a unified front, as did the community board, of course, with a nearly unanimous vote. And the rally that we had in May, 300 plus people showed up. And so, the community's position was very clear. And I think it's because of that we were able to reduce the height of the tower significantly. But at the end of the day, there was, this was a very, I hope, unique political moment where the political pressures prevailed over the really common sense and substantive land use and zoning reasons why this project is a bad idea. And so in the end, the city council voted 43-5 last week to approve the blood center Longfellow Tower. The other piece that I want to highlight, a couple other pieces I want to highlight. First was that in addition to the height reduction, there are some significant benefits that are kind of mitigation payouts that the park will see, as will Julia Richmond Education Complex. So $10.6 million are going to the park. Most of that is coming from the city and the administration as opposed to the blood center, but it's still a significant amount for St. Catherine's Park, as well as $2 million going to the Julia Richmond Complex for technological upgrades and that sort of thing. So those are two good things to come out of this. The shadows, of course, really in practical terms cannot be mitigated, even with a 233-foot building. The shadows will still be significant on the park, on the public realm, the streets and sidewalk, the Julia Richmond Complex, all of that. There are lots of images, which I won't get into unless you'd like me to share my screen, and then I can go over in more detail. And I think that at the end of the day, also, a lot of the assumptions that were presented to the community board and presented throughout the process as, these are facets of the project that cannot be changed. They, of course, were changed. Things like the amount of square feet for Longfellow, for this to be profitable, all of the ceiling heights. There were lots of aspects of the proposal that were overly inflated from the beginning, and that gave them room to come down without really impacting the bottom line, I think. And so in the end, the small amount of reduction in square feet of the building all came from the blood center portion of the building. The commercial portion of the building barely lost anything. And another kind of upside of this, amid all of the depressing angles and the fact that this was the first time member deference in the city council has been overturned in 10 years, which I think is a bad thing for all of us who are advocating for communities citywide. But one good thing that came out of this is we discovered throughout the process, and the neighbors in 333 East 66th and 301 East 66th were able to take advantage of this obscure provision in the city charter by which neighbors within 100 feet of a rezoning area can file a protest with the city clerk, which then requires that any action passed by the city council following a city planning commission resolution must be passed by a supermajority of 3/4 vote rather than a simple majority. In the end, this project passed with such a wide vote margin that the protest didn't have an impact. But I think that this is something that has existed in the city charter for years and years and has rarely been invoked. And so I hope that going forward, this provides, for projects where it applies, provides a new path for communities to make their opinions known in the land use process, which, as we know, is so uneven and really so privileging of the developer side of things. And so any bit of community power that we can muster, I think, is a good thing. And I think that will provide another path going forward in other projects. I'll stop there, but I'm happy to continue the discussion.
Thank you very much for the bad news. Is there a member of the public in this list of speakers, of people who signed up? Should we first go to
Leah Hanlon? Yeah.
Leah Hanlon?
Yes, hi. I just wanted to thank everyone on this board, and I mean, not only Rachel, but also Valerie, Mason, and everyone else that I may have missed for all the work they did in trying to fight the tower. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And thank the public for all the work that they did. It was very impressive. Next is Valerie Mason.
Thanks. Thank you, Leah. Appreciate that. A couple of things I just want to say. I think it's a real testament, first of all, to this community for the unanimity, the dedication to this project. I'm going to go a little bit further than Rachel. I think this is a cautionary tale for every community in this city, and that we were fighting, as some people have said to me throughout this, a perfect storm of bad consequence here. And that, you know, unfortunately, we were trying to fight the battle on land use issues. And that was not going to win the day. And when you're up against somebody, a private developer, who's got basically an open pocket, a deep pocket, it's going to be very difficult. And I'm really thinking about this on a go forward basis, because unfortunately, I have to disagree with Rachel a little bit here. I don't think that this is a one-off. I really do believe that this is going to be the beginning of a real onslaught here. There is definitely a roadmap here that if you can spin the narrative correctly, that you can go around the local community and whatever their wishes are, and you can somehow, with all your money and power, figure out a way to distinguish your project in a way that makes it so important that it has to go forward. And that, and when I say cautionary tale here, I think that, and this was said by some of the council members during the last hearing, the Euler process is broken. And there is really no effective way for a community to fight any longer. If member deference is not going to be observed, then there is, we, collectively found this arcane provision in the charter, which essentially meant that if this petition was live, and we think it was, because given the venomness that came at us once it looked like this petition was going to work, meaning that 3/4 of the council had to approve the text amendment. So we believe it was actually very valid, although the city clerk tried its utmost not to say whether it was or wasn't. That it is just so difficult to fight against these projects when you have somebody who has so much money and can have the single-mindedness of doing this, especially with the support. I mean, it is just mind-boggling to me in a city that's languishing with over 6 million square feet of commercial real estate that's unoccupied, that almost $500 million of tax breaks was given to a private developer to erect this building. And it was also very eye-opening to me to see how hard it was to engage journalists in looking at this until the very end. A lot of the responses we got were, we're not going to look at this story incrementally. So they were not interested in what happened at the community board level. They were not really interested in it when it was at the borough president level. They were not interested in it when it was approved by the city planning commission. They were only interested at the very, very end. And even then, this is a complicated story if you really look at it. They only wanted real sound bites and salacious and nasty stuff. And it's very difficult to even get the story out there in terms of what we were really trying to preserve here, not just for this neighborhood, but for the entirety of the city. We met with various council people all throughout the process, some of whom said to us, we wish we had R8B in our district. Now I scratch my head and say, who cares? It doesn't matter. It's whatever the narrative is being pushed. Adam is smiling as well. It doesn't matter. It matters on a case-by-case. I think this administration has also set the stage for spot zonings to happen almost, I want to say, as of right. We saw no willingness of anyone to fight. And again, we are going to, there's supposed to be this commitment and written agreement. So while we have lost this battle, I don't think, not that we're not going to lose the war. And I don't even want to say that we lost the battle. I mean, I don't think there's no underestimating the fact that we got this building chopped, okay? And that despite what people said, 100 feet off this building is a huge victory. And we have to remember that. And that in a lot of other neighborhoods, this building would have gone up at 334 feet. To not, and it has nothing to do with our neighbor who collects blood, because who knows, they may never even come back to the building, okay? This was all about a commercial developer, regardless of what was in the newspaper. And I think that we're gonna see more of these fights. I hope we've learned some lessons, but we are also gonna continue to monitor what happens here, because they are getting a $450 million tax break over years, it's true, plus other grants associated with the fact that they're in the life science building. We're gonna watch this very closely to make sure that our electeds put an agreement together that we can monitor and that they comply with the agreement, even though, as Rachel mentioned, most of the money is coming from the city rather than the developer. But I think we can be very proud of what we did here. We can build on this for other ULURPs. I think, again, I would like to see us take this lesson to other community boards and share our experience so that when these things happen in other neighborhoods, we can make other people aware of what is going on and try to help them and do this. Because, you know, IRFA fought a fight over a building and they think they won. Not that they won, maybe they didn't win, but they got some rezoning. And I say to that, this just goes to show you that it doesn't even matter. So that's I think a false comfort when you've got a street zone residential. And I really do think, given some of the remarks that were made at the city council, that there is definitely, you know, we're talking ourselves getting all hyped up about 210, but I will tell you that there is, I believe, a definite vibe in the city council to put more and taller buildings in Manhattan. And it's going to be, I hate to say it, an uphill climb to fight to keep the residential what we've got left of our residential council district 5.
Could you
space? Done.
Yep. All right.
Thank you. Can you unmute me?
You're unmuted, or I can hear you anyway.
Yeah, you're unmuted.
Okay. The next speaker, and I want to get to the old business soon, so I'd appreciate succinctness. And the next speaker is Michelle Birnbaum.
Yeah, thank you, Elizabeth. Thanks, Valerie. You worked very hard on this, as did many others. The community was terrific on it. The board was terrific on it. Everybody was. Unfortunately, And I understand all of the reasons, we're looking for why this went south, what happened, we actually on the merits, I think we were correct on the merits. I don't think there was a rationale presented to breach the zoning on the mid-block for this project. I don't think there was any rationale in reality for it. And unfortunately, I think things turned when the developers brought in the union. And I think unfairly and without thought, and it was absolutely wrong that they brought in the race issue. And that was very painful to all of us, actually. It was a painful thing to do because the implication to bring that in to an argument about zoning, when in reality, as construction workers, they could have worked anywhere that this project will be going up. There was no threat to the loss of jobs. It was nothing like that. And that was the only thing that was brought up. Or I assume the developer brought them in, but it was when the union came in and when they presented their case to the council. I think that's what turned it. And I think that's very sad, very unfortunate, because when you breach quality of life, you breach it for everybody. Every neighborhood is going to be at risk. With the Plan NYC that had been presented to us, they're going to try to, put high density buildings in communities that are now zoned for single family housing. And let's see how those communities are going to react to it. This is a very, very bad thing. The other thing I just want to say is I'm sorry with the award of 2 million to the school and 10 million to the park. To my mind, it should have been the other way around. The park, where I supported and I care about it, did absolutely zero to help with this effort. As a matter of fact, they fought us on this effort. I don't think they deserved anything. And since the issue is shadows, which they're going to be overshadowed anyway, I don't know why they should have gotten a $10 million bonus. The 6 schools could have better used that money, and that money was better deserved. Maybe we can do something to turn that around in some way. Member deference is a problem. Every community is going to face it if nobody cares. I'm not saying that all decisions have to be made by what one council member wants, but certainly they should have been given more of a courtesy than our council member was given. But I think the main thing that happened in the council was the testimony of the unions and the stress about jobs, which was completely unwarranted in this case and irrelevant. I'm very sad to say that. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Alida?
Thank you, Elizabeth. I just want to expand on a couple of things. The arguments in favor of the blood center were meritless, but the spinning of the narrative began with the DEIS, which was called Center East, the Blood Center. That's what it said on the title page. There was no reference to Longfellow. And in fact, Longfellow's involvement was downplayed from the very beginning. It was all about the blood center and the blood center's research and the blood center's internships and the blood center's jobs, except for the union part of construction. And even though they testified, their reps, the Longfellow reps testified at the city planning hearing that there was a 7-month differential between construction of a blood center as of right with the support from the community for variances and the Longfellow. All of that was ignored. This was steamrolled from the very beginning when the mayor tweeted back in September before they even came to us that it would be an upzoning of the blood center. And that's how they ran it from the very start, with $100 million going to a for-profit developer. The ramifications are enormous. And so all I'm going to say is that clearly, as Valerie pointed out, ULURP is broken. And so I would like to say for new business that I'd like to see this committee try and do something about the ULURP process. I know it will be an extreme uphill battle, to use Valerie's words, but something needs to be done. And I think that there would be a lot of support from community boards, not just throughout Manhattan, but around the rest of the city, those who are interested, because the advantage is to the developer. And at the end of this, it all depends on how much money you have and how much sway the developer has over the city council. We knew from the very beginning that city planning was going to fall at the feet of the developer, because that's what the mayor wanted. And it's all really unfortunate, without spending any more time. I mean, the health issues alone, radioactive materials, biohazards, no indication that all of the ventilation systems that had to be at a certain height, that had to be of a certain intensity or velocity, whether those were changed or not, in the course of lowering the height of the building and the floors. We don't know what the repercussions are, and it was all whitewashed. It's really unfortunate, but the community fought very hard and with much unanimity, and I think that made a difference. And having all of the elected officials support us. I don't know what happened during that so-called compromise, but it's all unfortunate, and I think we'll see repercussions, as Valerie and Michelle and Rachel pointed out, throughout the city. So something should be done, at least to get some momentum with ULURP. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alida. Lo van der Valk.
Yes, thank you, Elizabeth. I didn't realize that this was going to be a topic. It wasn't on the agenda, so I came late to this. And I came in the middle of Rachel's presentation. Representing Carnegie Hill neighbors, we are we're very discouraged by this result. On the other hand, we do stress that that 100 feet of lowering, I don't think would have been possible without the huge effort of this community board and the coalition of neighbors working as hard as they had. You had a lot of elected officials at that summer gathering on a Sunday. And some of them, of course, we know that, changed their positions, but not after a compromise had been reached. So, I just want to applaud the effort. It's clear, of course, we recognize this, that ULURP needs to be fixed. There are many flaws there in the process. We've faced this before in other fights, particularly, for example, the Marx Brothers Playground that centered on a flawed presentation at the community board, where it was argued that the playground was not a park. And we did not win that in the courts. We challenged that in the courts. We did not win that. But the one thing that I thought, and I think you will be in a better position to evaluate it, and that is that you made substantial progress in eliminating a tall building on Park Avenue with Lenox Hill, Northwell. Are there any lessons that you can draw? I mean, the great thing about that was that before the ULURP process had started, you were able to get elected officials to sponsor reviews of where the project would be headed. So maybe that is something that could be worked on in addition to ULURP. Okay, thank you very much for allowing me to speak in this part of the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Lo. Elizabeth Rose.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I just wanted to thank both the members of the zoning committee, the community board members here tonight, as well as the members of the public, because without the incredible turnout and persistence of everybody who's here tonight, in showing up at meeting after meeting and event after event, we could not have gotten the 100 feet taken off of this building. We could not. I believe that the waiver for larger commercial signage has also been eliminated from this project. We could not have gotten the additional funding, whether you agree with it or not, for the schools or the parks. It is at least investment in our community. And so I just wanted to say thank you to everybody for showing up and for showing up over and over and over again. I think for me, one of the lessons learned is it is very easy for us all to self-reinforce our arguments. And I agree with everybody who's spoken tonight that on the zoning merits, we were in the right. I think it is important for us looking forward to also sort of think of it from an opposition research perspective. You know, what does this sound like and look like to others? And I think there were a few hints and cues along the way where we heard some random comments about, you know, you're worried about sunlight in your park. We're worried about, you know, drugs and guns in our communities, where we, looking forward, I think we're going to have to be incredibly thoughtful about what are the things that are important to our community and how do they compare, because I do agree with Valerie that, you know, there was never a whole lot of empathy from the rest of the city for this community board area. And I think that is only going to be exacerbated in the years to come. And so I think we're going to need to really think about how do we bring more people into the tent in a way that's productive for all and build those broader coalitions. I think Julie Menon is going to be very helpful in that. And I think that as, you know, new fights come along, and there will be new fights in the future, that is something that I hope we also remember and take away with us. But overall, I do think this community put up tremendous fight, and I want to thank everybody for everything that they did.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Elaine Walsh.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I want to echo and will not repeat what others have said. I totally agree. But I do want to thank the zoning committee for taking the lead, to following what the issue was, for keeping it on zoning, and educating the community to the point that 400 to 500 people were showing up first in person, but then on Zoom. That was a major change for the community. The other thing I want to say is that it is a sad time when communities don't respect each other and get to know each other. When we were preparing the data to oppose Longfellow, and I'm sorry that it's called Blood Center because it has nothing to do. Today, under the new agreement, the Blood Center will have less space now than it currently has or would have if they just built as of right. People need to hear that. This was a land grab. It was for money to an outside developer from Boston. The lies that perpetrated were unaccepted, but we as a community were hesitant to take it on. Michelle spoke to it. It's true, we have a real issue among us. People don't understand. Indeed, you know, maybe we are a community of two, the east side of the neighborhood and the west side. It is sad to hear this. I was born in Yorkville, raised here, continue to live here. I have never seen what we went through. And for those representatives of other communities who opposed what we wanted, many in their community are going to face the issues because they have R3s, 4s, 5s, 6, and 7s. And it was a shock when I identified those areas, whether it was Middle Village or Bed-Stuy or whatever, that indeed they're all now at risk. And some self-serving elected officials from those communities don't care about their own neighborhoods. I got involved because I care. I'm born and raised, and I will die here. I'll die here. What else do I say? But the other piece that this city government has done, this mayor's office, this legislative affairs unit did, is they have what I call, and I think others and lawyers, and I am not one, I'm only a social worker, God forbid, are side agreements. I have seen nothing, nor do I know if anybody else has seen those incorporated, those side agreements incorporated into the final stages of this. I don't even know what the process is anymore. Okay, it's not a ULIP anymore. It's a land grab deal. But has anyone seen those side agreements incorporated into the final documents? We need to monitor, have access to that, and not through a FOIL, but we need to monitor that. Also, the $12 million or so that are going to the school and the park, we need to monitor that. Hey, I worked for government. If you really believe the city will transfer that money to the park or the school, you better think again. So that's another obligation we have, that we must look. The other piece we have not seen is the Parks Department has to sign off on mitigation when a development has cast a shadow or has a negative impact. We've not seen any of this. So again, we are faced with what we should believe. But as a native New Yorker, I know what I need to believe and see. And until I see it in writing, this is not a done deal. And any of those electeds, and thank you, Ben Kalos, for fighting the fight. Keith Powers, you did not fight the fight. You didn't even know it was in your neighborhood until I told you it was in your neighborhood. I'm really angry about that. And now he takes credit for what? Something the neighborhood doesn't want. I really want to thank you all, and Rachel, God bless you for doing it all, and Lydia for all the work you did. I'm not going to list everybody. You all know who you are. But we have another game plan. We need now to monitor what's going on and what's being implemented. And I agree with Valerie. Blood Center's never coming back. They got space in Long Island City and wherever. And God help us, we've just seen our city, our neighborhood, go down the tubes for developers who don't even know our city. And for the blood bank, where every member of that board does not live in New York City. Most, if not all, live in Westchester. They don't even pay a commuter tax. They could care less. They could care less. And the donors, yes, we need blood given, but there are a lot of other sites that take it. And we need to look at who's available 24/7 and who does not discriminate against gay people who want to give blood. Thank you.
Thank you, Elaine. Rita, and then Lida, and I see no further customers.
I just want to say to Valerie and to Rachel that thank you. Thank you for what you did. You were at the head of the pack, and we just came up behind you. But it was also a confluence of many things. One, that 2/3 of the city council is not going to be there to reap the benefits of saying this is what they did. Mayor is leaving. I mean, it was a confluence of everything. But it is my second go around. First one was for MSK, and that was for spot zoning, and this is for spot zoning. I think Al Butzel, who was a fabulous land use lawyer, said spot zoning is very hard to prove. And the one thing that always bothered me throughout this entire process was that we never asked for, well, if you couldn't have this site, where would you go? And at any rate, Valerie, thank you. Rachel, thank you. All of you, thank you. You did yeoman's work.
Thank you. And Alida.
Thank you. Community Board 1 faced an issue with a side letter with Hearst and the development around the South Street Seaport, where a side letter, and I don't know the circumstances, I don't remember, I attended a meeting where it came up. The side letter had actually no effect on their pleas to do something different with the property. And so Elaine raises a really good point. And to that end, I don't know how to deal with that, but maybe Rachel's the lawyer that friends hired, Karen Mira, who's done an excellent job. And again, Ben Kalos was exceptionally articulate and vocal about this. But maybe there need to be representative from the Zoning and Development Committee following what's going on in other communities in Manhattan and elsewhere around the city. Maybe there are lessons that could be learned, because we're reinventing the wheel several times, I think, to deal with issues that other boards may have faced. Not that they necessarily were successful, but at least they saw the issues, they saw what was coming, and they saw opportunities to protest them. So I think if it's possible, and it's a lot of work, to follow what kinds of novel issues, or at least rare or unusual circumstances, come before other boards to help guide us in all of what's soon to come down the pike. Thank you.
Thank you, Alida. Margaret Lehman has her hand up. Could you just make a very brief statement?
Very brief. Two points. Valerie, you mentioned there is going to be an agreement. Can, in that agreement, Rachel, Karen could maybe participate too with you, Valerie. The mid-building floor of mechanicals, right now it's the 7th floor. I know Ben fought hard, or at least I thought Ben fought hard not to have that. But if that mid-building floor of mechanicals, I'm thinking, of course, of the high velocity, extra fierce exhaust fans blowing out that concentrated, contaminated air. If that can be moved to the roof and not have that 7th or 8th floor level mechanicals blowing into the school and blowing into apartment windows, I think that would be significant going to Alida's issue of health. And in addition, given that 100 feet have been lopped off, maybe address, Rachel, you and Karen, Valerie, maybe address no longer the need for 4 loading bays. Why not commercial loading bays? Why not 2? Maybe they don't need 4 anymore. They never needed 4 probably to begin with. As Rachel said, this was an inflated size so that they could have gimmies and look like they're giving back. But maybe cut in half the number of loading bays and restrict their projected 7 commercial trucks per hour. God knows what that will be in real life, but maybe get some sort of limit on that. Elizabeth Ashby, I'm going to defer to you making it brief. Those are my only requests, Valerie, Rachel, and passing on to Karen.
Thank you, Margaret. And I'm going to hand it over now to Anthony, who will take care of new business.
Okay, thank you, Elizabeth. And we have a sort of new kind of proposal, yet another horrible fight. And actually, Adam Wald, this is something Adam has suggested, and and many of us have suggested similar, if not identical things. And so I think if Adam could give us a brief, not because it's not interesting, but because it's almost 9 o'clock, a brief summary of this proposal, and then we will take it up in more depth at a future meeting. But please, Adam.
Thank you, Anthony. Hope everyone can hear me. Sorry to bring up
Yes.
new business at nearly 9 p.m. But there were a few things that have gone on in the neighborhood, I think, that prompt some quick action. Of course, ULURPs and rezonings are not quick, as we've learned, unless you're Paul Selver, then they're quick. But this rezoning is an idea that I think is going to hopefully get back some more land so we can develop rental housing. The community, as you can, all the new developments are generally condominiums. There's very few space for rental housing. So hopefully, if we can trigger some rezonings, it will result in mandatory inclusionary housing, which by default will be rental housing. So I'm proposing that we look into rezoning those sites in the East 90s that are zoned C8-4 and M1-4. And I propose we study some sort of rough framework where the density is somewhere between R9D or an R10, which would result in mandatory inclusionary housing densities of 10 and 12 respectively. These zones are in the middle of the block, so it's all portions of blocks. And some of them are grouped together, some are separated. So I was looking at a portion of blocks 1556, 1557, 1569, 1570, and 1571. Those are all zones C8-4. And then I was also looking at the M1-4 zone, block 1540, which is 94th Street between 2nd and 3rd. I have another suggestion. I don't know if this is going to fly, but given that Hospital for Special Surgery made the announcement that they're going to move into the Excel Tower on 79th and 1st Avenue, which results in a loss of potentially over 500 apartments. I wonder if there's a way we can get HSS to come back closer to their existing campus. And I know the MSK rezoning was not popular, but potentially extending the C19 zoning to their campus that they've been putting together on block 1485, which is between 73rd and East 74th Street, potentially that could induce them to come back to really where their campus is, abandon the Excel Tower, and we can have 500 plus apartments in the Excel site on 79th and 1st. This is a very broad framework, and really it's just an idea. I know that there are some folks that support it, both on the community board and other stakeholders I've spoken to. I'm not sure if this is a venue for questions or discussion, but it's just an idea that some people have supported, and I hope we can do something to prevent 20-story self-storage towers and more commercial life science towers from being built in the East 90s and the East 70s, or really the East 90s. So I'll leave it there. I'll leave it to Anthony.
Thank you, Adam. I think, one of the things, especially about that little weird corner of the 90s, I hope nobody who lives there is on the call, is that it's been C8-4 since the beginning of zoning, or effectively C8-4 since the beginning of zoning. And
61, right? Is it from 61?
Yeah, it's 61, but it predates 61 as a quote commercial zone.
The use is
even in the 1916 zoning. And that's because that area and the Holmes and Isaac's houses just to the north of it were let's see, there was a big gas works there. There were gas stations, service stations, those kind of not quite manufacturing districts that have effectively disappeared altogether from Manhattan. I remember when there was a gas station on First Avenue, York, a little further down. But it feels like an inappropriate leftover at its most basic level. And changing it to changing that C84 to a residential zone makes a lot of sense. For the moment, not looking too deeply into what the particulars of the new zoning might be. And I think the same thing really is true of some of the odd M1 blocks, which are all sort of on the river and in some ways kind of related again to uses that are a little bit dodgy at this point. Con Ed actually in part. So I think this is worth our looking at, and maybe we can schedule that as part of our, probably I would say, the February meeting. We're not meeting next month. The calendar at the end of the month is holiday filled, and people's attention will certainly be elsewhere. In January, we expect to have someone from Excel to speak to us about the 79th Street, First Avenue 79th to 80th block, and hopefully we can persuade them to also talk to us about 86th Street at the same time, and someone from, as I hopefully mentioned before, someone from Keith Power's office, at least to speak to us about the revisions to the cabaret law, which will probably have quite an effect on the restaurant row avenues of Lenox Hill and Yorkville. So with that, do I hear a motion to adjourn? Oh, I see plenty. Marco, second. Elaine, any objections? So we are adjourned, and we will see you all, well, obviously see you all next month, but see you all in January. Thank you.